Good evening, everyone. I would like to declare the meeting open and welcome all of you who are in attendance this evening, and announce that this Audit and Risk Committee meeting is being live streamed and recorded in accordance with the City's Live Streaming and Recording Council meetings policy. By being present at this meeting, members of the public and those all present hereby consent to have the City recording and live streaming of their image and or their voice. I'd now like to call on Deputy Mayor Barry Winmar to present the Welcome to Country.
Thank you, Chair. I'll begin by acknowledging my elders past and present. Galat nyin kur galanoich nijin nonga buja. Nonga mutjerpa nijin and kwabarak nonga buja kurlong. From the beginning of time to the end, this is Noongar country. Noongar people have been graceful keepers of our nation for many, many years. Look, listen, understand and embrace all the elements of Noongar country that is forever our home. Hello and welcome. My heart is happy as we are gathered on country and meeting here on Noongar country. Thank you.
Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here, and before commencing the proceedings, I would like to acknowledge that we come together tonight on the traditional land of the Noongar people, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. I understand we have no apologies this evening, that we have no questions from the public, or petitions or presentations, and no deputations. Moving to item 6, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest tonight? No, thank you. And moving to the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of September. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at those minutes, and are you all supportive of the recommendation that they be confirmed as a true and correct record of the meeting? All those in favour? Thank you. Seconded? Thank you. All those in favour? Carried. We now move to item 8.1, the adoption of the annual reports. I'd like to call on a representative from the Office of the Auditor General to speak to this item. If you'd like to join us and introduce the item. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. It's that time of the year where we look forward to thank you. I'll start again. Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee in management as well. It's that time of the year where we, as auditors, we are always excited to be here, because it means it's the tail end of the audit process where we get the opportunity to present the results of our audit process. With me is my colleague from RSM, Alistair, who I'm not sure whether he should come now.
Yes, please join us.
Sure.
Spot there. Okay. Oops, excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Alistair and Kelly, as you are aware, RSM, they are the contracted auditors who do most of the underlying work on our behalf. But as the OAG, we are still responsible for the overall conduct of the audit, as well as the issue of the audit opinion. So, Chair, as I've mentioned, we have concluded the audit process. I think when we issued our report, there were probably one or two things that were still outstanding, because our office was just in the process of finalizing our technical reviews, which I can confirm is now all completed. And in that regard, I will hand over to Alistair to take us through the closing report which we have issued, and after that we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
There we go. So I'll talk to our report that was shared earlier, and as Tim mentioned, there were a couple of things that were outstanding at that time. So on the executive summary, there were 6 items identified as outstandings. Now, in summarise, they're really administrative. So they're when the representation letter is signed off, when financial statements are signed off, the OEG can release the audit report, and obviously we'll be providing our recommendation on that report to the OAG. Similar to last year, and showing on the executive summary, there's an unqualified audit report. There is again another emphasis of matter relating to the restatement, and I'll talk to that in more detail as we go through the pages. So I might, if I don't know if you're scrolling, if you can go to the areas of focus. The first one, which is page 6 of our report. So the 3 areas of focus in the audit in the closing report. Management overrider controls is a standard one. Every year we need to consider the risk of journal entries, the risk of bias in management judgments and estimates, and conducting our work. And in that one we had no issues. Revenue recognition, specifically to grants and subsidies and contributions, is an area of risk because of the complexity of the arrangements each year. So we've summarised our responses there, which were consistent with our audit plan that was submitted earlier. In the findings and conclusions, we highlight that there was an adjustment relating to the developer contributions, but that's further discussed in the third item that we go through, which is the third area of focus being the infrastructure and property plant equipment. Each year there's a requirement for us to consider where there's been revaluations and the like. We've identified in the first box there all of our procedures, and then I guess in a bit more detail on the conclusions. So there was a revaluation this year. The city decided to revalue the parks and ovals, and they've gone through a process. They prepared information and provided it to us quite timely. When we were digging down in the details of that, we were comfortable with the overall process. There were some very minor differences in how they've collated some of that information and flowing it through to the ultimate valuation. So we were satisfied that that is immaterial, and that appears in the summary of unadjusted differences. And we raised a minor management letter point. So I'll talk to management letter points in next on. But that's what it related to, was a fairly minor change or minor issue relating to the collection of information and flowing that through to the final calculations. The other item, I guess we're in the second year of it. There was a restatement last year with regards to these contributed assets, and the city undertook a further process to improve that. And in doing that work, they identified a further set of assets that needed to be recorded in the prior year, and have gone through that process of quantifying that, providing the evidence to us so we can validate that from an audit perspective. It is material, and they've disclosed that in all the adequate details in note 31 to the financial statements. I guess there's 2 parts to this. One, the city has been undertaking a more rigorous process and making improvements and correcting that. On the other side, having 2 years of restatements is not the greatest outcome, but it is the right outcome. And I guess when it comes to management letter points, there was a management letter point raised on this one in the previous year, being a significant finding. All those actions have been predominantly taken by the city, and we've been quite comfortable with that. We've raised a new item this year from this process about how it can be further improved, with the key recommendation to be having this item being on the internal audit plan for the year ahead, to make sure that there won't be a further repeat of this process. And we've been quite satisfied with how the management have responded to that in terms of our work. They were the 3 primary issues in terms of significant risks. Included in our report to the next page, if you could, are the other areas of focus. And they're common across all local governments. And so it's not like these are the other areas that we conduct our work, but we don't consider them to be significant risks. But we have to do additional work in these regards to satisfy ourselves on the overall audit. And that runs through that. The next page being the critical disclosures. So related party transactions and other areas of estimates and the like. So throughout we've summarised what our audit response was and our findings, and across them we've been satisfied. On the next page, if you could, so internal control findings. So there's 2 items on that page showing as open. They were the 2 items that I've been talking to at an earlier stage. So one being the contributed assets, which was previously a significant finding, now down to moderate, taking into account of the work that's been undertaken by management in the intervening 12 months. And then the other one, which was a minor finding, relating to that small area of carry forward of data from their process for the valuation of parks and ovals. There are other management letter findings throughout the process. All have been closed. Again, which I guess you could infer that management have been responsive to the findings and the process there too. On the next page, identified misstatements. We've got a responsibility to disclose to the audit committee any unadjusted misstatements that have taken that are through the process. So in terms of uncorrected misstatements, there are none. We're satisfied there were no other areas through our process. Adjusted misstatements are disclosed in the table above that. Which takes us to our appendices. So you can take all those thumbs as being positives. Again, confirming our independence. We've been discussing with management about whether there's any subsequent events that should be disclosed or changes to the financial statements. We've been satisfied as well throughout the whole process that when we've asked for information, management have been responsive to provide that information so we can conduct our work in those respects. And I may be just touching on responsibilities to fraud. Throughout our entire process, we have to be skeptical in the way that we approach our work, and particularly that flows through the sources of information that are provided to us and the responses from management. There's been nothing through our process that's given us an indication of a heightened risk relating to fraud. And the final appendix is just an update in terms of accounting standards. So there's some minor changes and clarifications that are coming through to the fair value measurement standard. In summary, it wouldn't have a substantial impact on the city, but it's something that to be considered as that comes to fruition. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions that the members of the audit committee may have.
Thank you very much. We might move through each of the documents and take questions in that order. So firstly, are there any questions on the auditor's closing report? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, when you're reading your lovely little tick box page, you talk about within the scope permitted, and you've also referred to how management has taken the practice of best practice upon your advisement. Do you have any recommendations for going into this future process about the scope of works that is provided? Should that be expanded, or are there other areas for industry best practice that the City of Kwinana could potentially lead going forwards? Is there something in your experience, in your dealing with the local government industry, would say that this could be best practice going forwards, or something to take under advisement?
I hate to answer a question with a question. Can I just clarify, are we talking about internal audit, the internal audit function?
We could be talking about either, but I was more referring to your audit or this audit practice that you're giving the findings. I just noticed like in what you have said, there's quite a lot of within our scope. So I'm just wondering, when I hear someone say within our scope, do you think there should be something else in that scope going forwards for best practice?
Thanks for that clarification. I think when we make reference to within our scope, because the current audit process is on the financial statements, and that's pretty much within the scope of the requirements of the Local Government Act, as to the audit of the financial report. In prior years, we used to do much more than auditing the numbers. There used to be some ratio information that we also used to audit and so on. But now it's purely just the numbers in the financial report. However, I think your question is definitely relevant, because across the wider sector, I think if I step back and say what are the key issues within the local government, certainly the assets and the valuation processes, that's a key thing. And the restatement that we're talking about is not just unique to the city, because most of the local governments, especially the big ones, actually, they are all investing into this large system, more advanced system. And as a result, local governments are actually going through the asset processes and verifying their assets, their holdings and database, and with the new technology that's coming around, the geo-mapping and everything. There's a lot of, I guess, cleanup that's happening in there, and there's quite a fair bit of restatements actually ongoing. And then linked to that as well is just the valuation processes, which we sort of did cover as well. I think around the parks that the city did value. Again, from last year, the benefit across the industry is that the requirements to do the revaluations is now a 5-year period. So while that may bring a little bit of relief to the local governments, over time it probably will be a pain, because once you evaluate after 5 years, again, it sort of goes both ways. And then there's also, I guess, the IT environment, which I think last year, if you recall, we had extensive discussions around some of the findings that we had in relation to IT. It's pretty much predominant across the sector. Again, links to the point that we mentioned around, so much investments being done in IT, and the arising risks, whether it's cybersecurity or any other risks that are coming. So that's a key industry-wide, I guess, issue at the moment. And then the other things, generally, I guess, with the new model of financial statements coming on board last year and this year, there are some new statements like statement of financial activity, which I think the industry is, I think at this stage they've adopted well. But again, the Department of Local Government is in our office, we continuously engage around just making sure there is, all best practice in terms of financial reporting are shared across. Again, going back to last year as well, there was a distinction between different classes of local governments in terms of preparing financial statements. Again, there's always that, I guess, view that we still need to simplify the financial reporting process as much as we can. So hopefully I've answered your question, but I think in a nutshell, those are some of the key things that our office is seeing just across the sector.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. The only other thing that I can mention as well is that our office, they also do other audits outside the financial audit process, which is tailored at its state agencies, including the local government. Like as an example, I think there is a current audit that's going on around just purchasing cars within the local government. So those reports, they're all published or tabled in Parliament, and that's something I think going forward we can engage with management much more around just bringing some of that thought leadership. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, including attachments B, C and D? Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, just an overall sort of comment. Thanks very much for the report and additional context. I think reading the financial statements together with a summary of the audit process is sort of very useful, and particularly sort of talking to that. So thanks very much. In terms of the contributed assets recognition finding, you talked around the sort of context for that. Given it's quite a large sort of figure, one specific question I had was it's a moderate rating, and I suppose the sort of question is the basis for the moderate rating as opposed to a higher rating, given how how high it is. And I understand it was a prior year audit finding. Was that sort of correct? Because just in, I think, page 4, internal control findings, it couldn't quite see whether that was, that was an internal audit finding. So yeah, maybe I suppose the specific question is in terms of the sort of moderate rating, the basis for that as opposed to a higher rated finding.
One of the things I think it recognises, whilst the number is larger this year in terms of the restatement, there has been proactive action by the city in response to the finding of the prior year, and that proactive action is what identified the asset or the combination of assets that needed to be recorded. So the control finding highlights that there is still work to be done, but it wasn't as bad as the previous year where there was, I guess, a more greater absence of controls.
Okay.
So there's been an improvement.
Great. So for the proactive sort of nature and the finding out big sort of control issues, it whilst it is an issue this year, I think your sort of suggestion of including it as part of the internal audit process will further remediate that also.
So whilst we are comfortable with the financial report this year and with the conclusion that we're recommending to the OAG, we've made this further recommendation of using internal audit to identify if there's any other enhancements to internal controls to that process. It is then theoretical that they will find additional improvements, and then theoretical that there will be additional assets identified as well. Theoretical. So if there was a restatement next year, again, it would still be an improvement. It wouldn't be a great look, but each year it is showing a demonstration of improvement. But you were about to, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to what Alistair made. So last year, the key finding last year was the fact that the city did not have, I think, strong processes around identification of those assets, while and that resulted in that was, I guess, an outcome of our further interrogation in terms of the audit finding that we'd sort of noted last year. So last year we had picked up the unrecorded assets as part of our testing. It was an audit finding, right? While this year, two things is, the first thing is that those assets were identified by management as part of their own process of enhancing the control environment based on the recommendations that were done last year. I think that's the key difference in terms of why it's moderate this year. It's not an audit adjustment, it's actually management adjustment that has actually come up out of that process. And what we then did was we obviously looked at what management had done, what processes they'd put in place, and yes, obviously acknowledging the restatement that had been done. That's why the rating then reduced to moderate. And again, as Alistair made, I think we just thought it's probably important at this stage that management have done all this work to enhance these processes, to then at least have an independent eye in terms of internal audit to just reconfirm those processes, whether they still need any additional improvements. But certainly, again, the restatement, on top of a restatement, is something that we definitely did debate at our office in terms of what does this mean in terms of our conclusions. But again, overall, in terms of the context, we're comfortable with still to issue a clean opinion.
So I suppose as a reflection, have that the strength of internal control processes to identify that in the first place, whilst it still has some control improvement to add. I think your sort of suggestions within the report, but also to consider it from an internal audit perspective, will give us additional assurances. And so I think there's some quite a bit of positive sort of bound up within the finding as well. So thanks for the additional context. I think having no high-rated audit findings across finance and IT, I think is quite strong. I think that's a reflection within the report. Again, I suppose the strength of the internal control process. One question, I think we're on track for having an unqualified audit opinion. Is there anything additional, since the reports were tabled, that would indicate that would be any other opinion?
Definitely not. Just to, again, to highlight the point that was made earlier. So it will be a clean opinion. It will just have an emphasis of matter, making reference to that restatement, to the financial statements.
Sorry, just one final question. I think relativity is quite sort of useful for the committee, just around how Kwinana may sort of sit against other peers. And whilst obviously it's difficult given that the nature of the organisations are quite different, but is there any sort of indication around whether it's a preparation sort of process that we have here, you know, the findings, is there any commonality or things that you'd like to call in just in terms of the process and where Kwinana may sit from an audit perspective?
That's a very good question. Look, I think obviously Kwinana is one of the largest councils, one of the largest local governments, and in terms, I think from an overall control environment, I think it's definitely the control environment is overall good because we actually do adopt a control lines confirmed to me, Kelly, in terms of certain areas of the financial statement, which certainly we don't do that with other organizations, with other local governments. Again, I think if you recall last year, definitely the area of around IT, there was a key area of concern around the audit process, which, as you can see from the report, quite a number of those, actually most of those have actually been closed off. And again, that's realization from our office that I think with all these investments in the IT systems, you know, relying on controls, especially IT controls, is something that will enhance the audit process as well as make life easier for management as well. So, I mean, to go back to your question, I think the city compares relatively well with all the other local governments, and certainly I think one of the things that which is a key measure that our office uses in our best practice forms, is to look at the quality of the financial statements in terms of, you know, how many versions of the financial statements do we get, because, you know, the more adjustments that goes through that process, the more it indicates that, you know, there may be a need for I guess for better enhancement. And I think that's certainly, I can't recall, Kelly, how many versions we would have received, but I don't think they were extraneous. And again, yeah, so overall, I think the city fares comparatively well with others.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much from the Office of the Audit General and RSM. I would like to invite the CEO to speak to the proposed approach with in regard to the audit for next year around the identification of assets.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, in a way, Ben's actually sort of answered the comment which I was going to say. So I think with this particular one around the capitalisation of the assets, it's a timing issue as well, because obviously we finish an audit, and then by the time we've got the report and start to put controls into place, we're back into doing the audit again. And I think, as was picked up, it was good that the team, through the control processes that we had in place, did identify it, and then were able to make the adjustment. That said, I think it would be useful, and we will do it for next year when I'm looking at Russell, when we're setting the internal control audit plan. We will have this down as one of the items which we will go through, so to make sure that our processes are in place. Thanks for the comments regarding our control processes and how we compare relativity, because it's something which we're always constantly reviewing, and I think that's a good thing to do within local government, is to be constantly reviewing your internal control processes and how you go about doing it. I would like to make special thanks, though, to Venetia, the CFO, and the team as well, because, you know, there is a lot of work that goes into it, and particularly around making sure our control processes are in place. We have obviously gone through quite a transition, going from an old authority system into Tech 1, and particularly with the move, which you'll get to experience next year with the audit, with rates. And so for the team to manage quite a transition, and I know the auditors love auditing rates, so next year is going to be great. But the team's done a fantastic job through that, so I just want to say thank you to them.
Thank you very much, and our thanks too. If there are no further questions with respect to the auditor's closing report, I'd now like to move to the audited annual financial statements. Are there any questions or comments on the actual statements? If not, we'll move to the management oh, yes.
So, sort of question: are we having a sort of discussion without the auditors here as well, or are we just combining all the discussion as part of this?
No, it will
agenda?
be all one
Okay.
tonight. Thank you. Unless you're requesting a discussion without the auditors? No. Yes. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, how I've done my notes, I've gone on pages, not on items. It is in item 8.1. Sorry if I'm going off track with my process. I just had...
If you would just direct us to the page number then?
Yes, please. Can I ask a question for page 31, which is the notes to and forming part of the financial report, property, plant and equipment? It was more a clarification from my understanding, if you may. Can I please ask, there's a asterisk note next to additions, and it said asset additions included additions received at substantially less than fair value. Can I please get some clarification to what that is in relation to?
Through the chair, those will be the less than 5,000 assets, because we don't show that on the register. People keep their own registers for those ones, so that is what it's at, and that's fall mostly within the plant and equipment, small plant items.
Thank you. May I ask my second question, please? Okay, thank you, Chair. On page 35, this will be another potential, just for my personal clarification, please. Sorry, just one second. Scrolling. Could you please clarify the asset class where it says land and buildings subject to operating lease? Would that be something like how... I'm going to use the example of the Kwinana Knights Football Club, that is a lease that the council has. Is that kind of asset? Sorry, just for my understanding.
Well, that's what it would be.
I think it is.
Yep. Now, is there a list of leased assets in here? I didn't pick that up. No. So
No.
I'd be guessing as to what is leased, if anything. But if anything's leased, that's what it would be for
It's
the
not applicable.
balance.
Not applicable, yeah.
And my final one is just on page 100. It's more a correction comment that next to Councillor Acker, myself and Councillor Penny, it says 111 sessions. I'm assuming it's supposed to be 11, considering the mayor was here, I believe, for 16. 17, sorry. I don't believe I was here for 111, just if we're passing the report.
It's a footnote.
It's a footnote.
Yep.
It's supposed to be a footnote.
But it does,
Just formatting how I read it.
yeah.
That was put in there for you.
I like to audit what I get and ask questions when I don't understand.
No, that's
Much
good.
to the CEO's delight.
Thank you for the questions. It is harder to read on the screen. Yep. Any further questions on the financial statements? Ben?
Thank you. Through the chair, I think reviewing the financial statements again reflect the significant amount of work that goes into both the preparation of those as well as sort of auditing, and I think the additional information up front within the agenda item gives additional context to quite a significant amount of sort of pages of quite financial information. So I appreciate both the sort of context and just noting that there's a significant amount of work in those. I guess from a financial statement perspective, from an independent sort of perspective, a strong set of financial statements, just in terms of financial sort of governance in relation to the sort of surplus, and sort of I think it's a good reflection from the sort of council, and having the ability to rely on those in fair and material respects, as noted by their audit opinion, I think is quite a sort of strong outcome. So yeah, congratulations to everyone involved. I think there was a sort of comment around the focus around IT, which is reflected in terms of the IT actions. So that's resulted in a decrease in terms of IT audit findings. So again, that's a significant amount of effort has sort of gone into that, and that's reflected in terms of the outcome. So that's a sort of great result. Just had a couple of specific questions I might just sort of go through sequentially, if that's okay, based on page number. The first is on page 10. And it refers to savings attributed to year-end adjustment for prepaid software expenditure. I just wanted to check, it's right at the top of the page. Was that relation to the One Council IT implementation?
Through the chair, these relate basically to, it's an accounting entry where basically the subscriptions is over 12 months, and we basically reversed some of those entries because it needs to be accounted for in the following financial year. So that basically shows us a surplus.
Okay.
Yep.
Because obviously 430,000 is quite a sort of significant amount for software. What was the software related to?
This is not only one software, it's many software because it's various software, including the Tech One licensing fee. So it's many various software products.
In terms of saving, that would be included within the budget process, presumably. So is not just a timing issue. Is that correct?
That's correct. That'll be accounted for in the budget also.
Okay. So just to confirm, it's a timing issue as opposed to any changes in terms of sort of software user numbers or any sort of difference between actual and budget?
That's correct. It's just the timing, and it'll be accounted for as 12 months into the budget.
Okay, thank you. I had sort of one question on page 11. Under correction of errors from prior years. I think it's the fourth line. It's saying it was identified that these assets were not timelessly recorded in prior periods. And I think I'm sort of getting sort of old. I wasn't quite sure whether that's previously or timely. I haven't heard the word timelessly before, so I just want to confirm the understanding of that. So the sentence is, it was identified that these assets were not timelessly recorded in prior periods. So just confirming whether that meant previously or timely.
It could be both because some of them relate to like going back to 2019.
Okay.
So yeah, it was not on time.
Okay, no worries. Okay.
Would you like that wording to?
I've never heard of it,
be
so I don't know
amended?
whether sort of I need to brush up on my understanding whether that's a new sort of term. I'm a bit out of loop with all the sort of cool phrasings and stuff these days. So I just wanted to confirm my understanding, because I guess not previously recorded is quite different to timing sort of issue. So that's where I just wanted to understand.
Probably previous would be more appropriate.
Yeah, and I think we've talked around the substance of the issue in terms
Yeah.
of the contributed sort of assets.
Yeah, no, I think that these should be clear. So I would suggest previously recorded. Is everyone comfortable with that? Yep.
Thank you. This question on page 46, contingent liabilities. So we had no contingent liabilities, but we do have possible contaminated sites. So I think we've followed the due process in terms of the DWARE reporting. Has there been any sort of updates within the sort of financial year in relation to that? Because with understanding it might be a bit of a timely process, but given that it's on our risk sort of register, I just wanted to sort of confirm if there was any updates.
Through the chair, we are undertaking site-by-site audits, as been indicated, and that's sort of just progressing. There is some further work, some further testing in particular related to the Banksia Road reserve that we'll need to do, but that's still yet to be confirmed by the consultant.
Through you, Madam Chair. Just further to what Maria said, and in relation to your comment, Ben. So we have, this is what part of the waste management reserve is for as well, is for management of contaminated sites. So this work that's been undertaken around the management plan will then identify what the scale of liability is, and then we'll have to look to see how we manage that through that reserve.
Great, thank you. So just to confirm, so even though it's a contingent liability because it's uncertain and not expected to be material, there's still sort of funds in sort of case it is sort of noted as such that there's appropriate process in place. Yes. Great, thank you. On page 86, it details the contributed assets recognition finding. I sort of had a question that there's a regular process for developer contributions audits that occurs, and that's on one of the agenda items today. Just want to confirm whether that's sort of part of the scope sort of for that, because I think sort of going back to, you know, there may be the addition of this sort of internal audit going forward. Is there opportunity to consider it as part of the scope, or are they sort of different enough where they'd be quite discrete audits?
I'll start. Through the chair, the report that's within the papers this evening is a requirement for annual reporting as per the state planning policy for developer contributions. So it is very prescribed in terms of what is reported and then published on our website to ensure that there's clarity and awareness around what is collected, what is spent for each of the developer contribution plans, and then being able to go through the process of advising all developers and landowners of the outcomes at the end of each year. We also are required to and undertake annual reviews of all our developer contribution areas 1 to 15, which we're currently undertaking at the moment, which requires, again, a mandatory process as per the state planning policy, requiring a review of the infrastructure costs, the valuation of land, an assessment of development that has occurred to date in terms of an audit of development that has occurred. So it's quite prescribed in that process in order to ensure that the rates that are set and set by council recognise market changes and development activity throughout the year and set that rate for future development to contribute towards going forward.
Okay, thank you. I guess that as a sort of follow-up, and this may not be sort of possible, but with the sort of the prescribement, is there opportunity to add additional sort of attributes, or is there any efficiency gains in terms of sort of inclusion this type of sort of audit as part of that process, or are that sort of distinct where it'd make more sense to keep them separate?
Through you, Madam Chair, they're two completely separate processes. One is around the management of the DCPs and how developers and how we get funds to account for community assets coming forward. This part is around the capitalisation of assets from when the developer has built things and then passes them across to the council. So they're two completely separate. As we mentioned before, what we need to do is just make sure that our control processes are in place to how we bring that forward, and we'll look to do it as part of the internal audit process.
Great, thank you. This on page 87 has evaluation of infrastructure sort of finding. There's sort of one question. There was a recommendation around the city implementing a peer review of valuation data, which I understand is sort of a process, but the management comment is that there's already a peer review in place. Just want to confirm the understanding, because one indicates that there isn't a review process, but the others are just saying that there is one in place. So I just wonder if it's sort of, whether it's in place or and sort of not working effectively, or that's not occurring.
Through the chair, I can confirm we do have a peer review in place. We actually review across the offices and then up to the manager as well. I think the auditors have made the point, and if you continue on into the management comment, we cover it, that when you do this cycle every 5 years, you get out of practice, and then you increase the likelihood that things are amiss or or the peer review doesn't know what it's supposed to be looking for, so it misses something that is really obvious to the auditor, but is not so obvious with us. I'll also point out that the parks infrastructure is the most complex of all the assets that we revalue. The rest of the assets are substantially simpler, so an error will flow through an entire asset set, so it's easy to spot. With parks, we've got a whole lot of very unique assets, and trying to find a single error or a few single errors is a lot more complex than doing it with the other asset bases. So it is probably the riskier one, but the continual process of redoing a practice audit each year, and the intent is we'll involve the finance team as well to audit our practice reval, so that when we get to the next go in our 5-year cycle, we are right on top of this.
Great, thank you. Just in the management comment, it references that the CFO will undertake a mini audit, and maybe through the chair's suggestion is maybe sort of reference that as part of the internal audit activity would be sort of good, because I think the results of that, considering this is the valuation sort of comes up sort of quite frequently, is it's quite a sort of key item. That might be good just in terms of sort of capturing it as part of the assurance or audit process. One final question. I'm mindful monopolising this sort of time, but just page 168 has a representation letter. Just has the error references not found as part of that letter, which I think is on the screen, has been updated, but just in terms of the agenda pack, just has those error reference sources. So again, just a minor sort of admin. That was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. So the management representation letter noted the changes and the links. I didn't have any further questions on the management rep letter, any from the committee. We also have the annual report in attachment E. Are there any questions or comments on that report? The annual report, the Part 1 community, is detailed in attachment E. If we could move to that. You're right. So that's a very attractive document. Are there any questions or comments on that? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a comment for city staff that have worked on this document and compiled this data, that you have given a very clear, transparent document, especially knowing that this is going to go to the ratepayer at the end of the day. Your ability to clearly and concisely display information in a way that gives access and inclusion to many different people. It is not a boring document, not saying that other ones are. Please don't take offence by anybody else on the table, but I just really would like to reiterate that the team behind this and how you have put this together to give to our community is a very high standard, and thank you all to everyone that was involved.
Well said. So if there are no further questions or comments, we have the officer recommendation that this committee recommends to council recommendations 1 through to 6, which should be before you now. Do I have a mover for those motions? Thank you, Councillor. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Winmar. All those in favour? Nil against. The motion is carried. Well, thanks very much to the Office of the Auditor General and RSM for your attendance today, for all your time and effort put into the audit of these accounts. And thank you very much, Venetia and her team, for the preparation of what we hope will be an unqualified audit opinion. Now move on.
Just a final comment.
Yes, Tim.
Apologies, Chair. Just one point that I just wanted to make. As I mentioned earlier on, RSM have been our contract auditors for the past 5 years, and our office, just as part of our regular, review of the audits that we do internally, it was decided that we retain this audit internally next year. So. There'll be new faces around in terms of the corridors working with Vanisha and the team, but we'll obviously make sure that the transition is as painless as possible. So just wanted to thank RSM for the work they've done over the last 5 years.
Yes, thank you very much to the company, but also to the individuals. It's been a pleasure working with you. So thank you very much for your support, and I'm sure we'll see you somewhere else. Thank you. Move to the next item now, please. Item 8.2, the risk management policy and strategy review. Would a member of the management team like to introduce this item, please?
Through the chair, and just briefly, the risk management strategy and policy for the city have a 2-year review cycle, which is currently due now. We've purposely tried to keep changes to these documents to a minimum. Based on some feedback we received from Risk West during their recent training provided to the city, we've made a couple of more significant changes. The first one being the control effectiveness ratings. We've reduced from 5 down to 3. Effectively, if something's ineffective as a control for the city, it's not much benefit for us to know whether it's partially ineffective or completely ineffective. So we've tried to minimise those ratings to get more meaningful data, make it easier for our officers. We've also reviewed our risk appetite ratings. The one change there being that we've changed reputational appetite from low to medium based on the fact that at the city we are prepared to take some moderate reputational risk. So we thought low was too low of a rating in that area. We have allocated some budget in the new year to roll out further training by Risk West. So as part of that training to officers, we'll be asking them to review our risk registers overall and provide some feedback as to how we're going in that area and areas of improvement.
Thank you. Oh, it's an important policy to review and update. Obviously, a lot of work's gone into this one. Are there any questions on this policy review? Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks for the update. The control effectiveness rating moving from a 5-tier system to a 3-1 is excellent, I think. It provides sort of simplicity, particularly for sort of risk owners. So I think that's sort of an excellent sort of move, as well as the risk appetite, reputation image, reflecting that as a number of sort of external, unavoidable and acceptable sort of elements within there. So that sort of makes sense, and appreciate the additional sort of context. I just had a couple of sort of comments that I might just run through sequentially, if that's okay. On page 194, it details the Audit and Risk Committee roles and responsibilities. I think the third bullet point, setting and review and risk management tolerances and appetite, I suppose I disagree with. I don't believe that's a remit of the Audit and Risk Committee. I think maybe reviewing or risk management tolerances as part of our governance and oversight is one component, but I think setting risk management tolerances is a clear management responsibility. So, okay, thank you. Also, just in the second last bullet point, conduct an annual review of the organisation's risk management policy and strategy, and then reporting to the CEO on its findings. That's an activity that states that we should do as a sort of committee, but I think in my time here, I don't recall us actually sort of doing it as a committee. So I just wanted to maybe refresh my understanding of whether that's a process that's been done in the past, and when, or if it has been done. I think I suppose the question is, if that is a responsibility, then we should do it, or it's just sort of restating the requirement to do that. And I think it's not a bad exercise to do. Whether an annual might be too much, is potentially a sort of question, but maybe through the chair, I guess, if it's something that we're comfortable to do, that's an exercise we should do as a sort of committee, and if so, including as part of that plan, and then obviously reflecting in terms of any findings back through the CEO is, I suppose, a reflection point or an action that the committee could take.
Perhaps every second or third year, if we were going to do that as a separate workshop. What is the process in the city for the review of the risks? Is that annual or biannual?
For review of the risks.
Well, it's ongoing, really, isn't it?
Through the chair, yeah, individual risks have set review dates depending on the urgency of the risk. So depending on whether it's high or extreme, low, medium, etc.
And who does that? What's the process?
So my team, the governance team, are responsible for the overarching process of reviews, but it's up to the individual teams to review their risks, and risks are allocated to individual officers for review.
I'll add to that through Madam Chair. So as Russell said, so it's the responsibility of individual officers and then also managers and directors, but the report also comes to the ELT, so as part of the audit and risk, and that's when we also go through and review those risks as well. I think we just need to have a look and see how we word this one, I think.
So that report could come to this committee when you do your review. If that came to this committee and we reviewed it, then that would be the annual review. Is that how it would work?
Well, no, it's more of a process around it rather.
Perhaps you'd take that question on notice.
Take it on notice.
Thank you, and come back to the next committee.
Thank you. Through the chair, the third last bullet point around setting the annual internal audit plan in conjunction with the internal auditor, I think similar to the previous sort of point around tolerances, I think setting the internal audit plan is a management function. I think we can provide some oversight and input potentially. So just through the chair's suggestion, just in terms of tightening up that wording, and then with the internal auditor, I think maybe just a reference to the chief audit executive, because the internal auditor may be an outsource, so we wouldn't necessarily, I guess it's through the internal audit function itself, perhaps.
I'm happy to comment. So with respect to that one, Ben, I saw that as the internal audit plan comes forward to this committee and we review it and effectively approve that internal audit plan. So perhaps the word setting is approve.
Yeah, I think approving, because it's the just that last sort of governance sort of check where management sets it or puts it together, and we approve as a committee. Yes, thank you. I had a question on page 214, which is contingency plans. So it details that essentially we might have contingency plans to pay depending on the risk, and contingency plan is typically quite a big control for some of the risks that we have. So the question is, do we have any sort of contingency plans for our risks? Because within the risk report, there's sort of some references on some of our sort of bigger risks, but I guess just a broader comment is how prevalent are contingency plans across our risk profile?
Through the chair, I guess the overarching contingency plan for the city is the disaster recovery document, which goes through each business unit of the city and lists out what the priority areas are in the event that we're unable to continue functioning. So that's probably the highest level contingency plan that we've got here.
Okay,
Through you, Madam Chair, just to add to what Russell said, the main contingency plan is obviously with IT, because that's obviously one of our biggest risks, to make sure that we've got continuity of service. Continuity. So that's where we have developed up the plans and costed those as to how we go about managing the system.
Great, thank you. Yes, page 223, which details the consequence criteria and rating. Health and safety consequence, we talked around psychosocial risk so previously, and obviously there's new legislation around that. So typically psychosocial impacts are included within this category and would seem to be the natural housing. So sort of suggestion is to consider psychosocial risks as part of this sort of category. And I suppose with health also, the category is primarily around safety treatment as opposed to long-term sort of health impacts. So other consequence tables would typically sort of cover off things like hearing is sort of impaired loss and things of those nature. So I think it's good to have the safety as a sort of key component, but consideration is to broaden that to be reflective of the health sort of component of that as well.
Yeah, I think we should. The point has just been made on page 223. Rather than particularly pulling out psychosocial as well as physical, it falls under serious casualties or illness with long-term effects. So, Ben, are you suggesting that that be specified individually?
I think you have sort of wording that talks to both the safety and the psychosocial
Yeah.
components. You don't want a massive consequence table.
No.
A lot of the public available consequence tables both talk to this, and it's particularly so there's some quite sort of easy wording can include. But I guess the fundamental sort of point is if we have that as a category type, it means we're assessing our risk against quite a prevalent risk. That's
Okay.
the sort of change.
Wayne?
Through you, Madam Chair. I'll take this one on notice because I think the way I'm sort of seeing it is that psychosocial is just one type of health and safety risk that we have. And so what this is doing, because psychosocial may result in one of these things in terms of the medical attention, the long-term effects. So rather than specifying that particular one, because you could specify some other ones as well, I think what we'll do is we'll have a bit of a discussion with Risk West in the new year. But I think at this stage what we've tried to do is wrap it all up into that. But we'll certainly take it on notice and have a look.
Yes.
Through the chair, I think it's beneficial just to point out that this is the risk to the city. Well, of course, very unfortunate that if an officer were to suffer a psychosocial injury, the real question here is what is the impact on the city? What's the risk to the city? So for that reason, the health and safety descriptors are kept quite broad because the risk realistically is probably more in terms of service delivery and financial in the event of a psychosocial injury.
Cool. Through the chair, I suppose I disagree. However, I suppose just taking our notice and considering, because I think including sort of components in there is one element, but really from a risk process is making sure that we consider psychosocial as a sort of component. So, happy for that to be taken on sort of notice, and there's lots of good industry sort of examples out there for, if you want to consider that to potentially include.
Thank you. Point's well made.
One question, I think we've referenced this last year, it's on page 226. It's around the risk escalation process, which refers to if a treatment's not within risk appetite, that we have a risk escalation form. Are there any risk escalation forms sort of at the moment? Is this a process that occurs?
It could probably be better described that most of these processes occur within CAMS risk. That's the approval and notification processes are now not a physical form. It's all through the CAMS risk software. So that could probably be better described within this framework.
I think utilising an existing system, you have the escalation points, etc. You don't need sort of forms hanging out there. So maybe consideration is just maybe sort of clean that up and reference the system. Yeah, and there's just in page 227, residual risk escalation form, for instance, if this stays in, there's words like risk executive officer just at the bottom in terms of C. So just, I suppose there's been confirmation around those sort of titles, and then page 229 has integrated risk manager as a title. So it's just cleaning up the wording or the specific sort of roles. So quite minor admin. That's just I suppose a consideration sort of element, but yeah, that's no additional questions from me. That this process occurs, like the review the policy, obviously the risk management process has continued to improve over sort of time. So it's a good process to do and great to have the discussion at the committee. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. My question kind of leads into referenced off 3 pages. So starting at page 193, we've got the risk management accounting and reporting levels table that has the council first, then the audit and risk committee, and then the CEO and senior leadership team beneath that. What I'm looking at though is when you go back to page 215, if I've got it correctly, the table, it actually starts at 214 and goes down, and it's talking about the risk review and reporting frequency. The council is only reported to biannually, yet it is at the top of the table for if we're only being reported our risks every 6 months, how are we, when the roles and responsibilities flow chart sitting at the top of that, would you not need to report more regularly in that instance with this framework of document?
Through you, Madam Chair, so that last part you're referring to is the strategy and the framework. But if you look up in terms of strategic risk reports and incident reporting, it goes quarterly to audit and risk. Audit and risk is a committee of council, so therefore it then flows through to council. So it doesn't need to be specified because of the way the reporting structure works. So that bottom one is referring purely to the strategy and the framework. Council, so does that explain it?
It's a clarification point, thinking especially, sorry, through the chair, didn't press my button, through the, like the new HR legislation especially, and the accountability with governance in that scope, just when you're approving documents that have these frameworks and circles of control, that there is a large legal weighting to ensure that you are doing best practice, and should there possibly be an increased frequency to council knowing of the liability and where it stands? Or
that is exactly what's occurring. So best practice is to use your audit and risk committee. And so from the audit and risk committee, the committee is then providing their recommendations, their comments through to council on a quarterly basis. So that is occurring. So that is best practice.
sorry, one more. On page 194, with the council at the top of the page talking about the governance role of the council, it says here that the council is responsible for setting the city's risk appetite. Again, piggybacking off what Ben said, is that more something that it's actually senior leadership team is setting the city's risk appetite, or does that actually fall under council purview?
No, I think that any governing body, of which the council is for Kwinana, should have the ultimate responsibility for setting the city's risk appetite. However, that's based on recommendations from management and also reviewed by this committee. CEO, would you like to add anything?
I think you've covered that.
Covered it, yeah. Well, thank you very much for the work that's been done on those documents. Just making sure there are no further questions. We have an officer recommendation that we adopt the revised risk management policy and risk management strategy. Can I have someone move that? Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Winmar, and seconded. Thank you very much, Mayor Feasy. All those in favour? Nil against. Carried. We'll move now to the council policy review. Now, I am conscious of time, so I would suggest we take these documents as read. I would welcome an introduction by management before we take questions or comments. Thank you.
Through the chair. This policy was not up for review, so we just used this opportunity to tidy up the policy and to just make some changes that we thought was necessary. The table that was covered in the report summarizes some of the changes that has been done. I can talk through that.
No, I think take it as read,
Okay.
unless there are particular items you would like to bring to our attention.
I think none of the changes are material. They are mostly cosmetic changes or just things to assist us administratively. But I can take any questions from the table that if anyone has questions regarding the changes.
Thank you. Any questions, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a question just on page 311, and it's quite a fundamental one. It's around the responsible manager may be excused from evaluation panels if it's justified and authorised by the coordinator procurement and contracts. I think there needs to be, sort of potentially sort of reasons and flexibility around the composition of the panel requirement. My question is really around the authorisation, whether the coordinator procurement and contracts is a right role for that, particularly because that covers thresholds of contracts above $250,000. So I guess it's a sort of reflection sort of point around, yes, as can be justified and authorised, but whether there should be a higher grade role to provide that authorisation.
Through the chair, that's a valid question. The coordinator procurement and contracts will only look at the low risk items. What is the scenario that we have here is basically it's only in the operations center where we have very equipped coordinators to evaluate those tenders. And if the manager gets involved in all of those tenders, basically the manager's only be evaluating contracts most of his time. So this was to alleviate that process only and not in the normal process of all the other managers. So that is what the coordinator has been designated to do, only in that aspect.
I guess through this chair, understanding having efficiencies built as part of the process, but I think the way the table sort of reads, if it still gives the ability to not have the responsible manager involved for items above 250,000, which is quite a high risk and quite a high threshold, so you're not going to get in the low volume. So again, I suppose the follow-up, if I apply this sort of table, then the responsible manager may not be sort of required to be included, and I think that may be okay in certain circumstances, but I do believe that a higher grade sort of role or process would be required to remove that from quite a high risk and high value type contracting process.
Through the chair, maybe I can recommend that it will come through to myself for the final authorising. Will that suffice?
guess maybe it's through the chair. I guess it's just that was my sort of reflection on it. I think the reasons for it and efficiencies, I think, is well made. We want to make sure the right people are making decisions. So that was my sort of inflection. I just wanted to throw it open for comment rather than dictating a solution.
So is there agreement that that role be performed by the CFO? Yes?
I agree with that.
Yes?
Yeah, I think that seems appropriate from my perspective.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, no further comment from me.
Any further questions? I think this is a really important policy, and I think it's one that we do need to make sure that we audit against on a regular basis, and that we also make sure that we have in place as many sort of contracts as possible that aren't just requiring ongoing tendering unnecessarily. So utilising the government supply arrangements. But
The Welker panel.
thank you. So if there aren't any further questions, I think it's a timely update, and would like to move that we, from the chair, the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. All those in favour? Nil against. Thank you. Can we move to the next item now, please? The Risk Management Report, 8.4. We'll take this report as read, but invite any comments from management on an exception basis. Thank you.
Through the chair, just a brief summary. There remains no higher extreme operational risks for reporting to the committee at this meeting. There's been one major change to the strategic risks. So SR30 related to business continuity has just had a title change to better reflect the actual risk posed to the city. As reported at the last meeting, two of the strategic risks have been moved to the operational risk register. That's SR17 relating to the 3-bin FOGO system and SR18 relating to the community engagement practices of the city. As I mentioned earlier, Risk West have been budgeted to provide further training more widespread across the city to officers in relation to risk management next year. So we're hoping that will see a marked improvement to our risk reporting practices.
Well, it's great to see none in the red, so thank you very much. I do have a question. Are there any other questions on the risk management report? Mr. Arnold?
Thank you. Through the chair, I guess similar to previous sort of comments, sort of level of reporting and sort of context has continually sort of improved, and so that's a good reflection around the sort of system, the updates and the framework, sort of, etc. I guess one reflection point is, whilst wouldn't expect extreme risks from a residual perspective, so that means once we've had all the controls in place, I think having no high risks is quite an interesting sort of one, and maybe that's just seeking sort of comment from sort of management, because I think on one hand, having no high rated risks indicate we have really strong controls, and I think there's data points for that.
Yep.
But to not have any high rated risks, particularly when there's some of those sort of areas that are sort of inherently sort of quite high, particularly as they go in the strategic place, etc., then there may be, you know, sort of some that may be on the higher scale. So just a reflection. Is that a sort of consideration, in terms of the risks that we have, the ratings that we have by risk owners?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think there's a couple of things. In terms of the current risks, there was quite an in-depth review that took place, and one of them, for instance, was around our waste management in particular. And as a result of the adoption of the waste strategy, the direction from government, that then enabled us to review the residual risk from that. But one of the things that is going to occur next year is the exec team will be doing some training with Risk West, and part of that training will be going through reviewing these and then looking at what are our strategic risks. And I think from that, there may come out of some of the changes. And I think particularly with the political environment that we have at the moment, you may see some changes within that.
Great, thanks for the additional context. And I suppose just sort of encouraging, if we do have high rated risks, I think that can be okay if we have the right treatment action plans and the controls in place. So it's just sort of encouraging getting the right response, as opposed to necessarily maybe arbitrarily sort of bring it to lower levels. But it sounds like the exercise sort of next year will further review the veracity of those risk assessments. We talked before around the control ratings being within the 3 tiers rather than the 5. From a risk management sort of process, what's the sort of timelines for risk and control owners to review it based on the new sort of ratings? Is there a current plan in place?
I guess it'll take time for my team to go into the back end of CAM's risk and make that change. Once we do that, we'll be working with risk owners, obviously prioritising the more high and extreme inherent risks, and then working our way down. We'll be working with the teams, and we hope over the coming months that we will update all the risks to reflect the new 3-tiered risk consequence rating. So in short, over the next few months, we'll certainly be working our way through those.
I think, again, maybe sort of encourage as part of that risk review process to consider controls at the same time. Yes, there's some mapping you can do in the back end because there's similarities between the tables, but it's maybe taking the time to have that discussion with the risk and control owners might be quite a useful exercise to do. Just one final question, just on page 345. It's around the risk of the failure to deliver business continuity in the event of a disaster. Obviously, that's a sort of new risk that's sort of been reviewed, but maybe suggest in terms of the next review date, rather than being August 2025, a lot of your controls are being reviewed by the end of December. So it's maybe taking the opportunity when those control ratings are in to maybe do that sort of next year. Understand sometimes in CAMs you sort of put it out to the furthest date, but it might be a good opportunity, given the significance of this risk, is just to review it early in the year.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, I just wanted to refer to page 336. The monitoring of the financial ratios are now both low. Thank you. Thank you. That is a change. So from previous risk ratings, as I recall.
Yes, just quickly, it's because there's been a change in
Through the chair, there is new indicators that have just come out in the last 2 weeks by the department. And those indicators are really positive for the city. So maybe at the next audit committee, we'll present those indicators to show how the city has been traveling, because that's been for the 3 years. It's done for over the last 3 years. And then we could also include the 2024 results in there.
That would be very useful. Thank you. And also, it would also be useful, the training that you mentioned from Risk West, to perhaps have a summary of what that has involved and the outcomes of that, even if it's not in specific risks, but any sort of underlying themes. Yep, thank you. Could we return to the recommendation, please? Right down the bottom. Could we have a mover for the recommendation? Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? Nil against. The next item. $8.5. Thank you.
Through the chair, so this report is a result of a request from the previous committee meeting for an update on overdue policies of the city. A concerted effort has been made by officers across the city to get all of our policies up to date. There's been 50 policies taken to council over the last 24 months. A number of policies deemed redundant have been retracted. This attachment A lists the 37 policies that remain overdue. We have now implemented a tracking software. It's called Attain. We use it for our gift disclosures, etc. So we've now recorded all overdue, well, all policies rather, within the Attain system. So policy owners get a review reminder. So we're going to continue to track those. Attachment B lists separately the city's planning policies. Now the reason for that is under the planning regulations, they are required to undergo additional consultation. So we considered it misleading to present them all together, so we've presented them as part of a separate attachment.
That's really good work, so thank you very much for doing that. I think if we don't even have a list of the policies and they're regularly reviewed, it's very hard to expect our officers to abide by them, let alone be able to audit against them, so thank you for that. And good idea using that system that we already have. Any questions on that? Thank you.
Through the chair, just a question on page 351, the table. The OCM date, is that when it's due for review?
Through the chair, that's the proposed date that the officer's intending to take that policy to council.
Okay, and what's the acronym stand for, sorry? OCM?
Ordinary council meeting.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No worries, that's okay. I suppose one reflection point, I suppose seeking comment is there's a lot of policies sort of there. I think policies typically a higher order statement relating to strategic objectives. So we have policies for things like charity clothing receptacles as an example. So obviously it takes time in terms of having these policies, reviewing them. I guess the reflection sort of point is, do we need all these sort of policies? Because you know, if not, is there an opportunity to rationalise?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes. We have a lot of policies, and so part of this process is we are going through and removing a lot of the policies. So you'll see for the next OCM, Council's got the pleasure of going through, I think, 17 policies, and I think there's about 7 policies which will be proposed to be revoked. So you're absolutely correct. Policies should be at a higher level.
Great, thank you. Just 2 follow-up questions. Do we have a sort of priority for these sort of policies? I appreciate there's sort of quite a few. If we do have a prioritisation, maybe it's a consideration of including that within the table itself, because as we sort of get to the scarcity of resources, and we may not necessarily sort of meet these dates, it might give a good indication.
Through you, Madam Chair. So in effect, when Russell and the team pulled this together, that's exactly what the ELT did with the managers. So we went through and identified the ones which are sort of the high risk, the policies which are sort of used the most often, because a lot of policies just sit there. So in a way we've done that, but we can certainly look to see how we could amend the report.
Thank you. And just a final question, given the ARC's responsibilities around oversight and policies, maybe through the Chair, a suggestion of including this as a standing item as we proceed through these sort of overview, and just a bit of a summary to be given at future ARC meetings.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent suggestion because this is an important control. I guess I just temper management's enthusiasm for policy reviews and approvals that they be done in a way that it's not just sort of pushing them through at the last meeting, because it really is important that, you know, the approver does have time to digest the policy changes. But I will leave that for others to decide.
So we have council side who will go through them meticulously.
Councillor.
Thank you. On that note, being aware that you would like 17 policies fully reviewed, could we please have the agenda for that final meeting as soon as humanly possible? Thank you very much.
Okay, look, I think it's a really good initiative. I think it should come to this committee as you're progressing through these as an oversight role. But if we now move to the officer recommendation, do I have someone to move that officer recommendation, please? Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. And seconded, thank you very much, Councillor. And all those in favour? Nil against. .6, the audit action log. There's a lot of information here. So I think we should take this as read. Anything in particular you'd like to draw to our attention?
Through the chair, if I could just draw a couple of matters to your attention. You note that several actions were marked as being due in September. I'm confident from the officers' feedback that those items are ready for closure. Unfortunately, I didn't receive the feedback from the officers until the agenda was put out, so that doesn't accurately reflect where those matters were at. So the next time this is presented to the Audit and Risk Committee meeting, which will be the next meeting in the new year, those will have updated comments. You'll also notice that the recent OAG financial audit findings weren't included. Again, that's simply because we received the report too late to make it into the audit log on this occasion. You'll see I've also marked, while we're continuing discussions with Coburn, who are keen to explore internal auditing shared services. In the meantime, so that we're not simply avoiding internal auditing here at the city, we're proposing internal auditing of 3 key areas. We'll keep what we consider key risks to the city. So that's retirement villages, fleet management and emergency planning. So we'll be engaging an external auditor to conduct those audits while we progress the discussion with Coburn, which unfortunately has been more protracted than we would like, but we're hopeful that we can achieve some outcome in that regard. Those are the key points. Thank you.
So we will need to add to this the asset audit. One of the things, the compliance audit return, 40 hours, does it still take 40 hours to do that audit? That is a substantial investment.
So the governance risk officer completes that. Does it perhaps 40 hours is probably on the end of the spectrum in terms of how long it would take them, but if all officers are prompt in providing their responses, it certainly wouldn't take anywhere near that. 40 hours is probably on the more extreme end.
So on the basis of that, and we've got to get that right. That is really important. It just seems that we've put 40 hours against all of those items, and I'm just wondering if we're missing an opportunity. If we've got X amount of audit hours, are we missing an opportunity to in fact include other audits over the year?
Through the chair, really this is dictated by how much the city is prepared to spend on internal auditing. 40 hours is enough for a relatively decent audit into those areas without breaking my governance budget, essentially.
Well, it's not the role of this committee to set the budget, but I guess intuitively, based on experience, the same amount of hours spent on fleet management, which, I'm assuming, making some assumptions there about the size of the fleet, versus an outsourced fleet management system, I presume, outsourced fleet, relative to getting the business continuity, disaster recovery, pandemic emergency planning done. I'm not criticising, I'm just saying that we should really make sure that we're allocating our hours according to risk. CEO?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. In a way we do. So Russell's using this just as a way to sort of identify each of the areas which need to be reviewed, but we do sort of work more on the budget side. So for instance, when we went to tender to do the compliance audit return, the rate that came back for that was quite favourable. So in a way we picked up doing some other internal audits, which then came through to the Audit and Risk Committee. So in a way, this is sort of scoping out. I take your point. We could probably reduce that down based upon the level of effort. But we do manage more on the budget side in terms of what we have, and we look to see what best value against the risks that and the areas that we need to focus on. But we can tweak that.
Yep, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, through the chair. I think sort of based on the comments from the auditors, the inclusion or the consideration of the developed contributed audits would seem to be a higher priority. So, understanding there's sort of constraints, it's sort of maybe sort of ensuring that we include those particularly before the end of the financial year next year, and if that reprioritises developments, and that will be part of that sort of review process that you do. I think the longer term plan of progressing shared services is a good one, and I think, hopefully, as we sort of get through those sort of discussions into next year, that's maybe the opportunity just to re-baseline. I think just because we, sort of have a particular area of review or sort of focus, take in consideration, what the how it may work from a shared service perspective is an opportunity to align sort of effort also. So perhaps it's sort of completing those sort of early sort of audits and then sort of looking to re-look at the remainder of the year might be a good move for consideration. I think the key element from this particular agenda item is the selection of the inclusion within a performance audit. I think that typically sort of comes with quite a significant amount of sort of work and focus from the OAG. So understanding that's notice is just in 14th of November. It does give the sort of key questions around gifts and benefits that have been reviewed. So any sort of additional sort of context around timing for those, the other councils, how widespread this performance audit is?
Through the chair, I have a meeting with the OAG to get all the information tomorrow. Unfortunately, I won't have that further information until I have that meeting with them tomorrow.
I think sort of performance audits carry generally quite a bit of sort of weight. It's OAG, and given it covers off gifts and sort of benefits, it's an area that covers off a lot of the potential sort of risks that we have, whether it be reputation, sort of fraud, corruption, obviously, which are hot topic items. So, whilst we don't pre-audit audits, maybe a sort of reflection is to have a look at our existing processes that we have for gifts and sort of benefits, if you haven't sort of already, as we have that sort of inner focus and continual improvement, just making sure that if there's sort of things that we can sort of do as part of that improvement effort, whether there be sort of policies, sort of procedures, or any other management sort of effort, then considering that as part of the our sort of general processes sort of might go down well. So I think given it sort of quite a sort of early on, I think maybe the next audit and risk committee will have an idea around the sort of scope and sort of timing, sort of etc. But I think that's quite a big potentially sort of quite a big sort of area that so I'd be interested just to know some of the details for that. No further questions from me.
Please, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Possibly more an observation. Our specialist advisors on the Audit and Risk Committee have historically raised about, I'm looking at page 363, with the approved completion dates, that best practice not to use ASAP. I see that there are some with actual dates, but to potentially put a date going forward, and I know that it's been historically raised, just that maybe going forwards we could attempt to rectify that, please.
Through the chair, thank you. I appreciate it's certainly not ideal, particularly from an oversight perspective. In that instance, we were unable to pinpoint an exact date. Obviously, we're working to achieve the outcome as soon as possible.
But I think what the council is actually saying is they would like at least an estimate of a date. Yeah.
It's got a proposed completion.
Okay.
That's it.
On the right-hand side. Okay. Okay, if there are no further questions, there's a lot of detail here in the outstanding audit, so it's good to see progress being made on those, but There's always outstanding audits. I'm just wanting to try and get a shorter tail. Can I put the officer recommendation, please, that we note the status report and the outstanding audit items? I'm happy to move it from the chair. Seconded, Councillor. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Development Contributions Annual Status Report, item 8.7. We're being asked here to note the Development Contributions Plan Annual Status Report and its publication on the City of Kwinana's website. Are there any comments, introductory comments from management, please? Yes?
Through the chair, I've sort of spoken to this already. It's a requirement under the state planning policy to provide a annual report that is then published to basically provide an overview of the infrastructure that's been specified in our development contributions, the extent to which we are providing that infrastructure, how much we have spent, how much we have collected within each of those DCPs, and their financial position at the end of the period. You'll note that we didn't report last year due to changeover in staffing and a whole range of resourcing issues. So this is sort of a catch-up over 2 years. So things that were missed in the first report back in 2022 have now been picked up in 2024. So I'm happy to take any questions.
If there are no questions, we have an officer recommendation that we note this report and its publication on the website. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Seconded. All those in favour? Carried. Work Health and Safety Statistical Report. I'll take this report as read, but management, are there any introductory remarks that you would like to make? No? Nothing? Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this report?
So just one question on page 425. In November, we had one incident with a medium event actual severity, so not inherent. It's I suppose it's an actual. Just wanted to get any further context for that incident.
Actually, Ben, would you just repeat that question, please?
Sure. On page 425 in November, there's two incidents, one sort of low and one medium of an actual severity rating. Just wanting any additional context for the medium actual severity incident.
Take that question on notice from the CEO.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, through the chair. It's actually more an observation, just again, especially when you read things such as the Staff Safety Expo, the City of Kwinana's ongoing dedication to creating a safety culture that encourages reporting, encourages the community to support each other, to have a best practice workplace. I highly commend it. It is really heartening. I know that I've said this a couple of times in council, to read reports where the staff are actively engaging in a strong safety culture. So go team, and thank you very much for your efforts.
Thank you. If we could return to the recommendation, please. Do I have someone move the... Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Seconded, Mr. Arnold. Thank you. All those in favour? Carried. Really good to see that report. Thank you very much for all the work that's gone into it. Item 8.9, update on the One Council project. Take this paper as read. Are there any particular questions on this project? Well, thank you for the update. We'll move to the officer recommendation that we note the project update. Oh, I beg your pardon.
Oh my God.
I was a little bit too quick, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I move
Thank you.
this recommendation.
And second? Thank you. Deputy Widmer?
Yeah, Councillor Acker.
Oh. Thank you, Councillor Acker. All those in favour? That's that. Are there any items of late or urgent business? If not, a couple of things. It's great to be back here in person. Thank you very much to the finance team and to the risk management team for all, and overall management team for all the hard work. These were extensive papers today, so thank you to the councillors, members. It was an attachment. Did you wish to discuss that item? My apologies. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much, though. And could I just say thank you very much to Wayne and his team overall, and wish you a very happy festive season. Thank you. Declare the meeting closed.